So good morning, everyone. I think most of you have joined. Good morning. So I think we can start.
Yes, ma'am.
So what we are going to look at today is again some prediction tools and some prediction tools for which you can determine the three-dimensional structure of a protein, whether you can predict, not determine, but predict how a protein is likely to fold. Yesterday, what we have seen is how local structures are going to be formed, how which prediction tools you can use to say that this part of the protein is going to form alpha helix, this part of the protein is going to form beta sheet, and so on. So what we see now are tools by which you can predict the complete protein structure, the three-dimensional native architecture of a protein. Now, structure ultimately will have to be determined, whether it is secondary structure, whether it is three-dimensional structure. You will have to use tools like X-ray, etc., by which you determine the complete structure. But if you have some idea, it also gives you like some confidence in what you are predicting. So this is one part of it where you have sequence which gives rise to the structure. Knowing the sequence and using prediction tools, because it is DNA which is going to give rise to RNA, which is going to give rise to protein. So knowing the sequence in many cases, depending on, and that we will see, depending on how well you are able to match it with something that already exists in your database, you can also, even without determining the structure, so with some level of confidence, you are also able to predict what the function of the translated protein is likely to be. That is, even without determining the structure, simply by finding out how much similarity the unknown sequence has with anything that is already present in your database. So when I'm talking of, I mean, why do I need prediction tools when tools like X-ray, etc. are there? I'm not. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with X-ray and how you determine structures using X-ray, but it is not an easy task. It is definitely not an easy task. I mean, the amount of data that is generated is so huge, and then from there you have to. So a lot of expertise comes into it. So what you're trying to do instead is that if you look at the numbers, these are the kinds of numbers that we are talking of. This is the translated EMBL. So these many sequences it has. We're not talking of nucleic acid sequences. From there, just by looking at the sequences, these are not actual protein sequences. It's simply that since you know DNA gives rise to RNA gives rise to protein, from there, what are the sequences that are possible? These are the sequences, protein polypeptide chains that are possible. This is the number for which we actually know these structures. So you can see that there is a huge mismatch between what is available versus how many proteins whose structures are known. These are not all proteins, there are some others also, but the majority is protein. Looking at the sequences, many a times you are also able to say, for example, whether a particular part of the protein functions as an epitope or not, or for some other function. So that is where the computational tools come in. You can, for example, if you are able to predict very well how a protein molecule is likely to fold, then let us suppose you want to increase the thermostability of the protein. So you have some industrial use. So for that, you need to increase the thermostability of the protein. So you know that theoretically, if I change this amino acid to this amino acid, then stability would increase. But when I look at the computational model of that protein, I find that if I carry out this mutation, the whole structure would collapse. So then I know that that particular mutation does not work, will not work. Then I look at some other mutation and some other mutation. So the idea of this is, and then you will also be able to do energy calculations, so you will be able to say whether it is more stable or less stable. So the idea is that when you actually carry out mutation, you still will have to carry out the mutation. But when you carry out the mutation, the number of mutations that you need to check becomes limited. It becomes smaller, so that is something which is manageable, because with computational approach, you have been able to eliminate many possibilities which are not, like, you will not get a structure with those mutations. It's also important for designing of drugs. It also helps you to understand how other proteins interact with your target protein. So ultimately, all have to be checked experimentally, but it narrows down how many experiments you need to do. So we look at a few of the tools that are used. One of the most commonly used tools, and you will do some of this in the practical part of this course. So some of the tools that you use, one, for example, is what is called comparative modeling. It is also more commonly called homology modeling, although homology modeling is not really it's not a completely correct term. More correct term would be that you're carrying out comparative modeling. So what do you do in that? Let us suppose this is an amino acid sequence you have, and you are now trying to predict what kind of structure this protein is likely to form. So this is a new sequence you have. You are trying to find out what kind of structure it will have. So what you do in this case is you go to your database and you look for sequences which share homology or which are similar to this sequence. So your database has sequences whose structures are known, right? So you take this sequence, go to your database, look for homologous sequences. The degree of similarity varies. I mean, how similar a sequence should you look for? Obviously, the more similar, the better are the chances that you will get a good structure. But in general, between 30 to 40% similarity is considered to be good enough as a starting point, right? So I look for and but the same way as everything, like you would do that when it is 1st of January, you make all kinds of New Year resolutions. I will get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and by 7 o'clock, I will finish my first round of lessons and everything. I will read everything before I go in for breakfast. And slowly, then you find that is not possible. So finally, your goal becomes, if I can get up at 7 o'clock in the morning, then that is good enough for me. So it's the approach is somewhat similar here also. You start with looking for a sequence which is where the similarity score is high, but because it's a new sequence, so that is not always possible. So then you go on reducing your threshold. Obviously, you cannot go very low, because if there is a sequence which has only 5% similarity with this sequence, so those are practically two entirely different sequences. So the structure that this known your database member has will have nothing to do with your with the target sequence. So this is then referred to as a template. This sequence or structure you know is referred to as a template, and this sequence which you are trying to model on the known sequence is then referred to as a query sequence. The query is for this sequence. So this is something whose structure you know, it is your template. And so in all of this, the first point is how good your template is. That will determine how good your fit is when you try to fit this sequence onto this. So next step, I think, is very obvious, that you will try to fit your sequence onto this three-dimensional structure wherever it fits. And so you use this as a template and model your sequence. Right? So the steps would then be recognizing a template. That is the most important thing. If you do not have the right template, then because if you do not have the right template, then what you have is the wrong template. And then what you will do is that on this wrong template, you will go on fitting your sequence onto this, where when it has nothing to do, there is no similarity between these sequences. So choosing the right kind of template is very important. Then of course you carry out alignment, and we will see the different ways in which you can carry out alignment. Then you determine structurally conserved regions. This is important not only for structure, because most of the enzymes, like we know, and you have also studied in your enzymology class, that you have classes of enzymes, right? Enzymes which carry out similar function. So an enzyme which is a dehydrogenase always has an NAD binding site because it uses NAD as a cofactor. So if I can determine these conserved regions, so it does not matter really what it is oxidizing or what it is reducing, a dehydrogenase will always have an NAD binding site. So if I can identify these conserved regions, then I am also able to, and that is where the function comes in, then I'm also able to say that this protein is likely to carry out oxidation or reduction of a substrate because it is a dehydrogenase, it has an NAD binding site. Right? Now, based on the structurally conserved region, then you generate the backbone, the peptide backbone of the protein. Then around that comes the parts which are variable. So these could be loops, these could be side chains which fall outside the backbone. And then once you have some kind of structure, then carry out its refinement so that it fits in on the model that is there, and then you validate, because there are very many tools. Like for example, you may propose a structure, but then you find out that energetically that kind of structure is not stable at all. Right, so then that obviously will not be the right structure. So validation then becomes important. Validation is also based on information from other sources that are available to you about that particular protein. So these are some of the tools that are available, and we will not go into details of these. There are structural databases that are there from where you can look for, where you carry out alignment. Then from there, you find out the reference proteins or the template that is there. Then from there, you try to determine the conserved regions we talked of. This you match with the protein sequence and then carry out alignment again based on this. From this, you can then predict the conserved regions in your template sequence, which leads you to generate the initial model. And then from this, you carry out refinement and carry out. So these are some of the validation tools, ProCheck, ProSA, etc. These are some of the validation tools that you have, which will then help you to come up with the finally predicted thermodynamically stable structure. So there are different ways you can carry out alignment. Alignment is basically finding out the similarity between your query sequence versus a sequence that is already existing in the database. So there are different possibilities. You can carry out global alignment, you can carry out local alignment. And as the name suggests, global would be all over the protein, local would be in some parts of the protein. And both of these have their uses. Multiple sequence alignment is more of a question of getting a like homology built in, that this protein or this enzyme is a part of this family. So there you have more than two sequences which you try to align. So a global alignment would mean the best possible alignment over the entire length of two sequences. So one is the template sequence, the other one is your query sequence. So this will work only if your proteins are of similar sizes. If one protein is of 100 amino acids, the other protein is of 200 amino acids, there's no point in carrying out a global alignment. Right? So only when the sequences are of similar size or similar length, you carry out global alignment. So global alignment is something like this. You take this complete sequence, which I assume is, let us say, your template sequence. This is your query sequence. So the word here is pillar. You try to fit it into wherever it fits into your template sequence over the complete sequence. It is not that in parts, okay, this is the only part that fits, so I pick up only this part. Not that way. Over the complete sequence, wherever it fits, you try to fit in your sequence. So this will work only if these two sequences are of similar length. Local alignment is at places much more useful than what global alignment is. So local alignment would be alignments carried out locally or in short segments of protein polypeptide chain. So which means that if you have two sequences, template and query sequence, you will have you can have multiple local alignments. Right? It is not necessary. Global alignment will be single, but local alignments could be multiple. So this is where you're trying to identify. So this could work with sequences which are completely of not the same length. But what you try to do here is with local alignment, for example, you will be able to figure out whether a protein has an NAD binding domain. That's just an example. But if you are able to identify that a particular segment of the protein is fitting into this NAD binding domain of the template, then I know that what I'm looking for is a dehydrogenase. Right? So the local alignment would involve stretches that are shorter than the entire sequence. And local alignment is suitable when I'm comparing substantially different sequences, which may differ significantly in length and have only short patches of similarity. So if I compare two different dehydrogenases, their only similarity comes near the NAD binding region. Why that is the case is because one dehydrogenase will work with one substrate, another dehydrogenase will work with another substrate. Substrate plus NAD gives rise to the product. So the NAD binding domain is the same, but if they have to recognize different substrates, then their structures need to be, by definition, their structures need to be different, because then only one enzyme will be able to interact with one substrate, the second enzyme will be able to interact with a second substrate. So in those cases, local alignment becomes important. And then I have multiple sequence alignments. So multiple sequence alignment would be something where I have more than two sequences. And this becomes useful when I'm trying to build an evolutionary relationship. Because in many cases, if I can build an evolutionary relationship, I know that this family was carrying out this function. Then again, for my query sequence, I am able to fit in what kind of function it is likely to have simply by looking at the sequence. So in these cases, multiple sequence alignments very rarely will give you very good fits over global alignment, but what you use them for mostly is to search for conserved sequence patterns in a protein family, or when you have more than two sequences of the same protein family available. So how do you determine whether the alignment that you're carrying out is good or bad? Alignment is usually done by eye. So for shorter sequences. So let us suppose this is your template sequence, the upper one. The lower one, ATG, AGT, is what you're trying to fit in here. So alignment can be done. This here, it is an example with nucleic acids. You can do the same kind of alignment with amino acids as well. The process is the same. So I do it like this. So this is there. So I try to fit in wherever there is a match. Where there is no match, I keep a gap, and then again I fit in. So these are complete fits. Here there is no fit. This is a mismatch, and then these two are complete fits. So now how do I know whether this is one alignment? This is a second alignment that is possible. I can also, same sequence, I can also align this way. So here there is a match, here there is no match, there is a mismatch here, then again there is a match, a mismatch, and then there is match in the last two entities. So what I then do is I give a score to the alignment. So wherever there is a good fit, I give this a score of +1. Where there is no fit, I give it a score of 0. And where there is a mismatch, I give it a score of -1. So when I do that, what this gives me is an alignment score, which tells me how good my fit is or how good the alignment is. So what this alignment tries to do is to maximize the number of residue to residue matches. In the alternate arrangement, this is also an aligned structure, but in the alternate arrangement, when I go into scoring, I find that this is +1, this is 0, this is -1, +1, -1, +1, +1. So it gives me a score of +2. So I infer that this is a better fit, a better aligned structure than this one. Now, for shorter sequences, this is possible that I just do it by myself, just by looking at the sequences. For longer sequences, it is not possible to do it this way because I may have multiple possibilities. This is one possibility, this is a second possibility. I'm also talking of longer sequences, right? So this is one possibility, this is a second possibility. There may be other possibilities as well. So then you come up with algorithms which are able to carry out this kind of alignment, and then they will give you scores. It is up to you to, it is not that it will give you only one aligned structure. It will give you alignment and then the score. It is up to you to determine with other tools that are available at your disposal, which alignment you think best fits with the structure, with the other properties of the protein that you know. Because sometimes there may be a very minor difference between two alignment scores. Let us say one is +15, the other is +14. Now, +15 is obviously higher than +14. But then you find that the structure that comes up with when I do the alignment, which has a +14 score, fits in much more with all the other, like I know what kind of activity it has, what kind of structural stability it has. The structure with +14 suits those properties much more than the structure with +15. So ultimately, it is your judgment. What the alignment score does is it gives you the possibilities that are there. Obviously, if I'm comparing +15 versus +2, then a +15 structure is definitely better. So what the alignment score does is it gives you the goodness of alignment or the goodness of fit, and then from there you take it further to determine the structure. So basically modeling the structure. You have now found out a template, you have aligned it, and now you are modeling the sequence over the template. So multiple sequence alignment. So these are the algorithms. This is what I do by eye, which I cannot do when the sequence length increases. So I take the help of algorithms. So I mean, and these are all algorithms that are already there in XFASI that we looked at yesterday. So if you go to XFASI, you will be able, and there are other tools obviously as well. But this embossed needle that we are talking of here is a part of XFASI. It is there. Other MSA tools are also there in XFASI. So you do a pairwise alignment. So pairwise would mean you're comparing two proteins. If it is possible, you include more than two protein references for the template protein, because then if you have two, so basically what it means is you have two templates on which you are modeling your sequence. So if these two templates are related to each other, then ultimately the structure that you generate out of your query sequence also becomes, you have more reliability on that structure. Pairwise alignment is useful in finding conserved domains among similar reference proteins. What you do in these cases is you use an algorithm which is called the Needleman-Wunsch algorithm. It gives rise to the software which is called embossed needle. So you use emboss to carry out structural alignment. And this it does in a multidimensional space. this kind of, obviously, I mean, the more number of sequences that you have, the longer sequences you have, the memory usage is long, but is more, but then that is what you have with all of these cases, because we are talking of sequences which are quite long. You're no longer talking of small molecules. So the Needleman-Wunsch algorithm is based on something which is called dynamic programming. Again, we will not go into details, but what dynamic programming does is it breaks down the problem into smaller overlapping pieces. Dynamic programming is always so you have subsets, right? We are talking of a long polypeptide chain. You break down this polypeptide chain into shorter segments, but because they are a part of the same polypeptide chain, so there are overlapping regions. So dynamic programming works on what is called divide and conquer, provided there are overlapping subsets. Right? So it builds up the best alignment by using optimal alignments of smaller subsets or smaller subsequences. So the same polypeptide chain, but now it is broken down into smaller pieces and works on what is called dynamic programming. There are other approaches also, and heuristic, you understand what heuristic means? Sounds to be a very sophisticated term, but what it actually means is what you can intuitively predict. It's just a rule of thumb. So if I have there are multiple possibilities, like we discussed there, that you can have a score of plus 15, you can also have a score of plus 2. So plus 2 is obviously a possibility that you will eliminate at the very beginning. So heuristic means you work intuitively, you work on the principle of elimination and trial and error. So you try different possibilities, whichever fits is what is called the alignment algorithm. So Clustal omega is one. Clustal 2 is Clustal 2 takes into account the evolutionary relationship between proteins also, but Clustal omega is the one that is used more commonly for multiple alignments. Then you can also have iterative multiple alignment. Iterative would mean that you carry out one alignment, see how good the fit. Iterative is basically, it means repetitive. You repeat the same thing. So you do one round of alignment, find out where the mismatches are. You again go back to the original sequence, and with that you try to optimize the alignment process. So this is what the Clustal omega looks like. What you do in these cases is you have to say whether your same principle works for nucleic acids as well as proteins. So you have to say what your sequence is and then write the sequence here. These are usually that one letter abbreviation works in these cases. You can also upload files and then ultimately you submit. So once you submit, then it will give out wherever your what are the other sequences with which your sequence aligns correctly. Now, what is important is this is not theoretical, this is experimental. You would have seen that whenever a structure is reported by X-ray, especially for protein structures, it says that this structure solved at 3 angstrom units, or this structure solved at 2 angstrom units. So what those angstrom units mean is that in this structure, you are able to differentiate a distance of 2 angstrom units. And that is what is called resolution. Resolution you follow, like in this case, if I go down, this structure has a resolution of 4 angstrom units. What it means is that any atom which is present, or any 2 or 3 or 4 atoms which are present within a 4 angstrom unit distance will not be separated. I will not be able to see them separately. I will not be able to resolve them. So the resolution is poor. If I compare this is the same structure, but I am now visualizing it at a 1 angstrom unit resolution. So I am now able to see those atoms which are even at a distance of 1 angstrom unit. Do you realize what the importance of this is? What is a CC single bond length? A carbon-carbon single bond has an average length of 1.54 angstrom units, theoretically. So which means that if I'm looking at a CC length here, I will not be able to see it. If I am trying to see it here, because the length is 1.54 and I can see down to 1 angstrom unit, so I am able to see CC single bonds here. So the same structure, but I'm now able to see this clearly. Looks to be a tryptophan residue. Right? So it becomes important when you are choosing a template sequence, how well resolved that structure is. Because if that structure is clean and that structure is clear, it becomes easier for you to model your query sequence on that template sequence. Like here, for example, if you are able to see this very clearly, then you are also able to use this as a model to find out the best possible structure for your query sequence. So the template that you choose also is very, very important. So the major source of error when you're trying to validate a model is, of course, the sequence identity, how much overlap there is between the template and the query sequence. And template is also something which somebody has determined using X-ray or some other tool. So if a structure is determined at 4 angstrom units resolution or 3 angstrom units resolution, the chances of error in this kind of structure are more than the chances of error in a structure which has been determined at 1 angstrom unit resolution. So the template may also have some error built in. Right? So the less number of errors in the template, the better your model will be. And then, of course, you have to check. This is something which is very obvious. You cannot, for example, if you're talking of a CC, your carbon always have to remain, for example, tetravalent. You cannot put things. So these are some things energetics-wise, fold-wise, stereochemistry-wise, bond lengths, bond angles. So you normally would not try to put something with carbon at a 90-degree bond angle. Then what are the, if you know that the CC length is 1.54 angstrom units, you should not put something at 2, try to fit in just because your template is there. So you try to stretch a CC double bond, a CC single bond to 2 angstrom units. Those things you should not do. These are the things that you already know. Know in the sense that these are the things that are already known beforehand. They have nothing to do with protein per se, but this is simple chemistry. What the bond lengths are, bond angles are, what kind of stereochemistry, what kind of regiochemistry, etc., is associated with each single atom. So those things you need to validate. Then your evaluation of the model, these are the different softwares that are available that will tell you how well your model, energetics-wise, how good a model you have been able to propose. These are some of the tools which are able to do comparative modeling. So the comparative modeling works because for what nature does is, nature, unlike us, for us, anything, a new model of cell phone comes up and or new model of laptop comes up, we all start running after it. Nature, on the other hand, that way is very, very miserly. If it has worked out with some particular structure, that this structure works for me, that it knows that dehydrogenase, it means I have built in a dehydrogenase where I have an NAD binding domain. So it will continue with all dehydrogenases having that NAD binding domain. It is not going to tinker with that just because it is fashionable to come out with a newer model. So what it means is that even if the sequence changes, because obviously if I'm talking of dehydrogenase 1 versus dehydrogenase 2, the amino acids in dehydrogenase 1 will be different from the amino acids in dehydrogenase 2. But the structure that it will generate, that dehydrogenase will have an NAD binding domain that is conserved in both structures, both dehydrogenases. So the basis of comparative modeling is that the shape that is generated is much more conserved, because nature has determined that the NAD binding domain should look like this, and if it looks like this, then it is always going to carry out an oxidation or a reduction process at that NAD binding domain. So that structure continues to be conserved even if individual amino acids that make up that structure may differ or will differ in different enzymes or different proteins. So the basis of that is, basis of why comparative modeling works, is that the structure is much more conserved in the sequence, and that is what you use to carry out this kind of modeling. And obviously, higher the similarity with the template, higher is the confidence in the model structure. That I think is pretty obvious. This will not work for proteins which have no similarity to proteins with known structures. So what it basically means is that if you are not able to find a template in your database with the similarity score that you're looking for, then you have to look for other methods of determining protein structure. If you are not able to pick up a good template, you cannot carry out comparative modeling. That is where other tools come in. So one of these tools is what is called threading. So threading is also called fold recognition. So what it means is that, like we discussed, the three-dimensional structure of one protein may not be the same as the three-dimensional structure of another protein. But what we also discussed is that there are smaller parts of the protein which may be conserved, and these are conserved throughout evolution. So what you try to do in these cases is, there is a library of 4 fold templates. There are about 1000 folds that are there as a part of the library. So when you have a new sequence, what you try to do is, have you seen what children do when they play with those beads? They have a thread, and then they try to add one bead after another into those threads so that it gives them whatever shape they are looking for. So this is also something similar. You have these libraries, these folds that are there. This is one fold. This is folds are arrangement of secondary structures. So these are what are called super secondary structures. So you can have different alpha here, alpha there combined, or alpha beta combined, beta combined, different kinds of super secondary structures. So these are different folds, and there are others that are available in the library. Now, when you come in with a new sequence, what you do is you try to put your sequence on this fold and see how well it folds. And you do that with all the folds that are there. So this is what you do in this case. So if this is the template that you have, you find that your sequence fits in very well, because it is not a random, just you dump something on something. Your sequence has an N terminal, it has a C terminal. So when you start from here, you somehow will have to build in this sequence so that it fits into this fold. Right? So when you do that, you find that this is the fold that fits in very well with the sequence that you have. So this is the best alignment of the sequence to the template. So what you do, your aim in this case is to evaluate any particular placement of a sequence onto a core template. So the core template is a member of the library. So you already have 1000 existing shapes in the library. Any unknown sequence you try to fit into this code. So how do you fit is, if you were to fit this is your polypeptide chain. If you were to fit it in here, you would find that there is a huge loop-like structure here, which is not thermodynamically stable. So only in this fold, you are able to put the amino acid. So you are basically adding one amino acid at a time to see which of these folds gives you an energetically stable structure. So you search over space of alignments between sequence and each core template, and the method for choosing the best template given the alignments that are possible. Why this works is that if you look at the PDB, we saw how many structures it has, right? PDB has a number of protein structures that are there, but all of these fall into those 1000 odd folds. All of them carry those 1000 odd folds. That is one reason why threading works. The other reason, of course, is that instead of now looking at the complete protein, which you were doing in comparative modeling, now you are working on a smaller part of the protein. So that makes it better as far as fitting it onto a model is concerned. So one reason is that that there are only 1000 folds in all of those different structures of proteins that are available in the PDB database. Second is that over the last 3 or 4 years or 5 years, of all the structures that have been deposited in PDB database, more than 90% of them follow the known folds that are already reported. So chances are very high that your protein will fit into one of these folds that are already a part of the database or are already a part of the library. Chances of success with this are higher simply because you are now looking at a smaller part of the protein. You're not looking at the complete three-dimensional architecture of the protein. So you find the compatibility between the sequence of amino acids and their corresponding positions in a core template. Like I said, if this structure you are trying to fit into this, you will have to stretch the structure or constrain the structure so much that it is no longer an energetically favorable structure. So when you are doing this fitting, you need to keep in mind amino acid preferences for solvent accessibility. So what it means is that when a protein folds, usually the polar residues, the charged residues face outside because the charged residues need to interact with water. Then we have yesterday seen that there are some amino acids which are always a part of a particular secondary structure, either alpha helix or beta. They prefer to be part of alpha helix or they prefer to be part of beta sheet. So when you are proposing a structure, it should not be that all your non-polar residues come outside, or an amino acid residue which you know always prefers to be a part of alpha helix. When you're building the structure, you propose that it will be a part of beta sheet. So those factors you need to keep in mind when you're proposing a structure. And then, of course, two side chains should not come very close to each other. That is where Ramachandran plot comes in to ensure that amino acids, side chains basically, remain as far apart from each other as possible and remain within the allowed regions of Ramachandran plot. So what we have discussed till now are methods by which you are dependent on a library, right? So you have a library, and based on, in the first case, it was a library of three-dimensional structures for comparative modeling. In the second case, when you're going in for fold recognition, it was a library of folds. But many cases you find that you do not have the right template. You may be working with a protein for which there is no fold that is already reported in the database and no three-dimensional structure that is reported in the database. So for those cases, you do what is called ab initio modeling. So this is the Rosetta method. There are other ab initio modeling methods also, but the Rosetta is the most commonly used method. It has been devised by David Baker's group. So it's an ab initio modeling, so which means that it starts from the very zero. They do not use any template, or they do not look for homology in library or evolutionary conserved proteins. So what you do is you now go back to those secondary structure prediction tools that we have seen. So you predict the secondary structure of different fragments of a protein sequence. Once you have done that, then you link these fragments together, and you try to obviously link them in such a way that you get a structure which is a thermodynamically stable structure. So you are not going in, so you are not biased. There are, you're starting from just the sequence. You do not look for anything which you can use as a model or something which can function as a template. You do not look for homology with any known sequence. You take this sequence, chop it up into smaller pieces, and then find out secondary structures. Secondary structures, if you recall, are local structures. So once you do that, then you have these secondary structures. Once you have built, then you link them together. When you're trying to link them together, you will find that there are two nearby secondary structures which cannot come close to each other, because then that gives a very unstable structure. So you again will go back to the drawing board and start making the structure again till you get an energetically stable three-dimensional structure of the protein. So although it looks to be a very long-run process, these are some of the predictions that Rosetta has come up with. So if you see, the native structure is the structure which is known by structural tools. So this is the actual structure of the protein. Model is what Baker's group has proposed using Rosetta. And the third structure in these cases are structures which have been proposed based on databases. So probably comparative modeling. So if you see this, the ab initio, fragment-based ab initio prediction tool gives you structures which are very close to what the actual structures are, compared to what the database modeling proposes. So the point here is, it is not that this is better or that is worse or this is good and that is bad. Depending on what kind of protein you have, like database modeling will only work for those proteins for which you already have known templates, or templates with a high degree of similarity. So it is, and sometimes what is possible is that you may find out a template which has a high degree of similarity, but then there are errors in the template itself. So those errors will creep in when you try to model your protein, the query sequence. So it is, again, not to say that this is good, this is bad, but just that you need to have a structure. You finally need to end up with a structure which is a thermodynamically stable structure and which is able to explain the properties of the protein as they are known to be, as they have been experimentally determined to be. Okay, so this is what the PDB database looks like currently. There are different tools by which you can determine structures. X-ray is still now the most commonly used structure. With proteins, with NMR is not that easy to use. Electron microscopy in the last few years has come up, cryo-electron microscopy has come up in a very big way to determine protein structures. And then there are mixtures of techniques also with which you can determine the structure of a protein or structure of proteins in complex with other entities. These are some of the consortia which usually determine a protein structure. Riken in Japan is, Riken otherwise also they have a very strong biology group, but otherwise in this case also in determining protein structures also, Riken has the most structures which have been reported in the PDB database, and then we have other consortia also. These are usually different labs working in different places, which are a part of a consortium, which determine or which finally propose the structure. So do you have a class after this?
Yes, ma'am, we have, ma'am.
Okay, then what I will do is I will stop here right now. And what about 12 o'clock? Do you still have a class at that time?
Yes, ma'am, we have, ma'am.
Okay, so afternoon?
2 p.m., ma'am. Is it okay?
Yeah, 2 is okay, 2:30 is better.
Okay, ma'am, 2:30.
Okay, so then we will pick this up again because there's no point in starting it right here. So we'll pick it up at 2:30 and we'll start from there. You have any questions till now? Anybody?
I think no questions, ma'am.
Okay, great. So everybody is present, right? Okay. So we will meet then again at 2:30 p.m. so that we are able to finish this part of it. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you,
Thank
ma'am.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.